It started with a question so simple I almost laughed, except his eyes weren't joking. Milo, my 15-year-old, came into the kitchen holding my phone. His face pale under the overhead light. "Mom, who's Adrian?" My throat closed. He had found the string of messages I thought I had hidden so carefully. Threads of words and late-night emojis that belonged nowhere near the life I built with his father. My first instinct was denial. Say it was work. Say it was nothing, but his voice cracked when he said, "You call him baby." He wasn't supposed to see that side of me. The one I kept compartmentalized between carpool drop-offs and grocery runs. The secret self I let out only in hotel rooms along the I-95 or in whispered phone calls when the house was finally asleep. Milo's eyes were wet but furious. His shoulders stiff like he was bracing for a hit, except I was the one hurting him. I reached for the phone, but he yanked it back, glaring like I was a stranger. "Does Dad know?" The room spun. I pictured my husband Elias in his office downtown, always trusting, always certain of me. Milo was standing between us now, armed with a truth I hadn't planned to release. I wanted to rewind everything, back to the first time Adrian brushed my wrist at the community fundraiser, back before I crossed a line that felt thrilling and poisonous all at once. But my son was staring at me, demanding something rawer than excuses, and I had none ready. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and in that heavy pause I realized it wasn't Elias who would unravel me first, it was Milo. The boy who carried both of our faces in his. Milo didn't wait for my answer, he stormed upstairs. The thud of his door shaking the picture frames in the hallway. My hands trembled against the counter, and for a moment I thought of chasing him, begging him to sit down and let me explain. Though what explanation could soften what he had seen? Instead I stood frozen, listening to the muffled rhythm of his sobs through the ceiling. Hours passed before he came back down, his face blotchy, his eyes avoiding mine. He asked for the car keys, said he needed air, and I knew he was going to find Elias. The thought made me nauseous, the idea of my own son delivering the blow I had kept hidden. I followed him out to the driveway, barefoot on the cold cement, pleading with him not to tell his father, not yet, not like this. "It's not what you think," I whispered, but he spun on me, his voice breaking. "It's exactly what I think, Mom. You lied to us. To him. To me." The keys slipped from his hand and clattered on the pavement. And then he collapsed against the car, shoulders shaking. I touched his arm and he flinched as if my skin burned. In that moment I saw it, the fracture already spreading between us. The trust we once had splintering like glass. I wanted to tell him about the loneliness that crept in during Elias's endless late nights at the firm, about the way Adrian made me feel visible again, but none of it mattered. To Milo, it was betrayal pure and simple. And now he carried that knowledge like a weapon he didn't want but couldn't put down. The next morning the house was too quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. Milo wouldn't look at me, barely touched his cereal before pushing the bowl away. His chair scraping loud against the tile. Elias kissed my cheek on his way out the door, oblivious. The smell of his aftershave lingering while Milo's eyes darted from him to me like he was watching a performance he could no longer stomach. When the door shut, Milo finally spoke. "You're going to tell him. Or I will." His voice was flat, drained, older somehow, like he'd skipped years overnight. Panic clawed up my chest. I reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "Don't. Just don't touch me." I thought of all the nights I'd tucked him in The scraped knees I'd bandaged, the secrets he used to whisper to me under the covers. And how easily one of my own had demolished that bond. Please, I said, my voice cracking. Let me figure out how. It's not so simple. His jaw clenched, and for a flicker I saw Elias's face in his. The same stubborn set of the mouth, the same quiet strength. You made it simple when you did it, he said, and walked away. Backpack slung over his shoulder. I stood in the kitchen alone, my coffee untouched, staring at the empty space he'd left. Knowing time had run out. My son wasn't just holding a secret anymore, he had become the reckoning I couldn't postpone. That evening Elias suggested we go out for dinner. Said it had been too long since we'd sat together without distractions. Milo froze when he heard it, spoon halfway to his mouth, and I felt my pulse in my throat. At the restaurant, under the soft glow of hanging lights, Elias chatted about a new case. About a promotion rumor, about maybe taking a trip to Maine in the fall. I nodded, smiled when appropriate, but my skin buzzed with Milo's silence across the table. He kept his gaze low, pushing pasta around with his fork until Elias finally asked. Everything okay, kiddo? Milo looked at me, not his father, and my stomach dropped. His lips parted like he was about to do it, spill everything right there between the breadbasket and the wine glasses. I pressed my heel against his under the table, a silent plea. But he jerked away, eyes flashing. Elias noticed, brow furrowed. What's going on? He asked. The air tightened, thick with the weight of words unsaid. Milo's chair scraped suddenly as he stood. I'm not hungry, he muttered, bolting toward the exit. Elias half rose, confused, but I grabbed his wrist. Let him be. Teen stuff, I lied, my voice too sharp. He sat slowly, studying me with that lawyer's gaze that always sniffed out half-truths. Teen stuff, he repeated, not convinced. I smiled weakly, fingers trembling around the stem of my glass. Knowing the dam could break any moment, and when it did, it wouldn't be on my terms. Milo barely spoke to me the rest of that week, his silence louder than any fight. He kept to his room, headphones clamped over his ears, door locked even when Elias knocked. I hovered outside more than once, listening to the faint rumble of his voice on the phone with friends. Catching fragments like, can't trust her, and, don't know what to do. My stomach twisted each time, guilt clawing me from the inside out. Friday night Elias came home early with takeout, determined to spark some family warmth. He set cartons on the counter, called for Milo, and when our son emerged, eyes red and jaw tight, Elias lit up as if nothing was wrong. Got your favorite lo mein, he said. Milo dropped into a chair, unwrapping chopsticks with hands that shook just slightly. Then, without warning, he asked, Dad, what would you do if Mom betrayed you? Elias laughed softly at first, thinking it was some hypothetical, but Milo didn't smile. He looked straight at him, then at me, his chest heaving. Elias's face changed, color draining as if he'd walked into a cold wind. Milo, he said carefully, why are you asking me that? The silence was unbearable. I reached across the table, but Milo shoved his chair back, eyes glossy with unshed tears. Because she did, he spat, and the words fell like shrapnel between us. Elias turned to me, his mouth parting, confusion and disbelief colliding on his face. In that single heartbeat I saw everything fracture, the dinner, the trust. The fragile web I had spun, and knew there was no rewinding now. Elias didn't yell, not at first. He just stared at me, his hand frozen over the carton of noodles. As if moving would make the truth more real. What is he talking about? He asked, his voice low, each word spaced like he was afraid of the answer. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, to deny, but Milo's glare pinned me down. Elias pushed back from the table slowly, his chair groaning across the tile. Tell me it's not true. His eyes, usually steady, now flickered with something raw, pleading. Almost begging. I opened my mouth, but nothing coherent came. The silence betrayed me before I could. His face collapsed, the weight of realization hitting all at once, and then the storm came. Who? His voice cracked like glass. Who the hell is he? Milo flinched at the volume, but he didn't move, watching the wreckage unfold. My chest burned. I whispered a name I hadn't meant to say out loud, Adrian. The syllables cut through the room like a blade. Elias staggered back, one hand pressed to the counter as if to steady himself. His wedding band glinted under the harsh kitchen light. A cruel reminder of the vows I had broken. My God, he whispered, shaking his head. How long? I felt Milo's eyes on me, demanding the truth, and Elias's eyes demanding it too. And I knew there was no version of this story that wouldn't destroy us. My answer spilled out in fragments, months turning into years, loneliness, mistakes. Excuses that sounded like poison even as I said them. When I finally stopped, Elias looked at me like I was a stranger who had been living in his house, sleeping in his bed. He walked out without a word. The slam of the front door echoing through the walls, and Milo just stood there. Tears streaming down his face, whispering, I told you it would break us. The house felt hollow after Elias left, every sound too sharp. Every shadow stretched thin across the walls. Milo sat at the kitchen table, his face in his hands. His body shaking in a way that made him look both too young and too old at once. I wanted to reach for him, to gather him up like when he was little. But I stayed rooted to the doorway, knowing my touch would only push him further away. Hours passed before Elias came back. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate, and when he appeared in the doorway, his eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled like he'd been driving aimlessly. He didn't look at me first, he looked at Milo. You shouldn't have had to carry that, he said softly, and Milo broke, throwing himself into his father's arms. The sound of his sobs carved me open. Elias held him tight, his gaze finally landing on me over our son's shoulder. There was no rage in it anymore. No disbelief, just an emptiness that chilled me more than any shouting ever could. We'll talk later, he said, his voice hoarse, but right now I need to take care of him. And that was the sharpest cut of all, the realization that in one night, I had shifted the gravity of our family. Milo no longer turned to me for comfort, he had chosen his father, and rightly so. I stood alone in the doorway while they clung to each other. The gulf between us wider than I'd ever imagined. My secret hadn't just ended a marriage, it had rewritten the map of who we were.